You are not confused, and you were never wrong for feeling what you felt, because the truth is, you were dealing with people who never intended to understand you in the first place. You noticed how your words were twisted, how your intentions were questioned, how your silence was used against you, and even when you explained yourself clearly, calmly, and honestly, they still treated you as if you were the issue. That was not miscommunication, it was strategy. Toxic people do not seek clarity, they seek leverage, and when they cannot control you directly, they attempt to control the narrative around you. The more self-aware you are, the more dangerous you become to them, and that is why they rely on confusion, gaslighting, and distortion. They count on your depth, your empathy, your willingness to reflect and ask yourself whether you might be wrong, while they never question themselves at all. You were not failing to express yourself. They were refusing to listen deliberately. Every time you tried to be understood, they shifted the goalposts, demanded more explanation, more justification, more emotional energy. Not because they were confused, but because confusion keeps you talking and defending while they remain comfortable and unaccountable. And when you finally stopped explaining, they changed tactics. Suddenly you were labeled cold, arrogant, distant, or difficult, and that label was not an honest assessment. It was punishment for no longer feeding their need for control. Being misunderstood by toxic people is not a weakness. It is proof that you no longer belong under their influence. The need to explain disappears the moment you realize that some people benefit from never understanding you because your silence removes their leverage. This is where real power begins. Not in proving yourself, not in winning arguments, but in knowing who you are without needing agreement. Once that certainty settles in, your words become fewer, your presence heavier, and your reactions measured. You stop trying to be seen correctly by people who profit from seeing you wrong. And in that quiet shift, the balance of power changes, without confrontation, without noise, without them ever fully realizing when it happened. They need you to react, and not because they are strong, but because without your reaction, they have nothing to stand on. Toxic people are built on borrowed energy. They don't create power of their own, they extract it. Your irritation gives them relevance. Your explanations give them importance. Your emotional spikes reassure them that they still matter. This is why they provoke subtly, never directly. A small comment, a sideways remark, a delayed response, just enough to pull you out of balance while they watch. The moment you react, even internally, the game shifts in their favor. Your mind starts working on them instead of your own direction. You replay words, imagine responses, plan explanations. They occupy mental space they never earned. That space is the real prize. Toxic people don't want conflict, they want access. Access to your attention, your emotions, your focus, and once they have it, they slowly drain it. What most people never see is how fragile this dynamic actually is. Take away the reaction, and the structure collapses. When there is no emotional return, their behavior loses purpose. They escalate, not because they are confident, but because they are panicking. Silence feels like rejection to them. Calm feels like disrespect. Indifference feels like defeat. And the more composed you remain, the more exposed their hunger becomes. This is why restraint feels unnatural at first. You were trained to explain, to clarify, to defend. They were trained to exploit that instinct. But once you stop feeding the cycle, something irreversible happens inside you. Your nervous system settles, your mind clears, their words lose weight. You begin to see their patterns before they even act, and what once felt overwhelming now feels predictable. This is not passivity, it is control. You are not suppressing yourself, you are choosing where your energy goes. And when you no longer provide emotional fuel, toxic people are forced to confront something they've been avoiding their entire lives. Their own emptiness. That confrontation is never loud. It is quiet, confusing, and deeply uncomfortable for them. And all you did was stop reacting. Distance is what changes everything, not physically stepping away, but emotionally pulling back in a way they can't detect until it's too late. Toxic people are used to instant access to you, your thoughts, your reactions, your availability, and the moment that access becomes inconsistent, their confidence starts to crack. You don't announce the distance, you don't explain it, you simply stop meeting them at the same emotional depth. Your replies shorten, your tone flattens, your urgency disappears, and suddenly they feel something they hate more than confrontation: uncertainty. Emotional distance makes you unreadable, and unreadable people are impossible to control. When they can't predict how you'll respond, they lose their grip. They start overthinking every interaction, replaying their own words, wondering if they pushed too far or lost influence. What used to be effortless manipulation now requires effort, and effort exposes weakness. You, on the other hand, begin to feel lighter, less pulled, less reactive. You're no longer inside their emotional gravity. This is where Machiavellian advantage quietly forms. You are still present, still polite, still composed, but no longer emotionally invested in being understood or liked. That shift alone alters the power balance. Distance creates respect where explanations never did. It creates caution where confrontation only created resistance. And the most unsettling part for them is that they can't accuse you of anything. You haven't attacked. You haven't withdrawn dramatically. You've simply become unavailable at the level they depended on. Over time, this distance does something deeper. It trains your mind to prioritize clarity over emotion. You begin to see interactions as patterns instead of personal attacks. Their tactics stop feeling personal and start feeling predictable. And once something becomes predictable, it stops being threatening. You're not hardening yourself, you're refining yourself. You're learning that power doesn't come from intensity, but from control. And control is born the moment you decide how close anyone is allowed to get. They will eventually try to pull you back in, and this is where most people fail, because the instinct to confront, explain, or finally clear the air feels logical, even mature. But with toxic people, confrontation is not resolution, it is supply. The moment you sit them down, spell things out, or try to make them see your side, you hand them exactly what they want: engagement on their terms. They don't hear your words, they study your tone. They don't process your logic, they measure how invested you still are. Explaining yourself is especially dangerous because it signals that you still need to be understood by them. That need becomes leverage. Every sentence you add gives them more material to twist, more angles to attack, more opportunities to keep you emotionally involved. You think you're closing the loop, but you're actually widening it. Toxic people thrive in conversations that never truly end because endless dialogue keeps power fluid and unstable. Silence, on the other hand, closes doors without slamming them. When you stop correcting false assumptions, something interesting happens. They are forced to sit with their own interpretations. Some will grow louder, hoping noise pulls you back. Others will play the victim, hoping guilt does the job. Both tactics serve the same purpose: to make you break your restraint. And if you don't, they are left talking to themselves. This is where restraint turns into dominance. You don't chase clarity. You don't rush to defend your image. You let time do what words never could. Over time, their version of events loses energy because it has no resistance. Lies need friction to feel alive. Drama needs participation to survive. Without your involvement, their narratives collapse under their own weight. What feels like passivity from the outside is actually discipline from the inside. You are not silent because you are unsure. You are silent because you are certain. And that certainty is unsettling to people who rely on emotional chaos to feel powerful. They sense the shift, even if they can't explain it, and that is when the dynamic begins to reverse, not through force, but through absence. At this stage, something subtle but decisive begins to happen, even if no one names it out loud. You start becoming unpredictable, not because you are chaotic, but because you are no longer emotionally available on schedule. Toxic people survive on patterns. They learn when you respond, how you respond, what tone pulls you in, what silence makes you nervous. Once those patterns disappear, they lose their map. And a manipulator without a map is just an insecure person guessing. You don't become loud or dramatic. In fact, you become calmer. You stay polite. You stay composed. But your responses no longer come from obligation. Sometimes you reply quickly, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you engage lightly, sometimes you disengage completely. There is no explanation attached to any of it. This inconsistency is not accidental. It is the natural result of someone who has stopped prioritizing emotional access for others, and that unsettles them deeply. What confuses them most is that nothing is wrong on the surface. You didn't accuse them, you didn't confront them, you didn't disappear completely. You simply stopped being predictable, and because they can't openly challenge that without exposing themselves, they begin to feel powerless in silence. They replay interactions. They question their influence. They wonder whether they still matter. That internal instability is something they were used to causing in others, not feeling themselves. This is where many people make a mistake by thinking power requires visibility. It doesn't. Real power changes the atmosphere without announcing itself. When you stop reacting on cue, you force others to adjust to you. And toxic people hate adjusting because adjustment means loss of control. They prefer environments where everyone else bends emotionally while they remain fixed. When that stops happening, they either escalate or retreat. Escalation is not confidence, it is desperation. They may provoke more openly now, make sharper remarks, test boundaries harder, or try to trigger guilt by reminding you of the past. They want to confirm that they still have influence. And if you stay grounded, if you don't reward the behavior with emotional spikes, the escalation burns them faster than it burns you. Their tactics become obvious, their timing gets sloppy, their calm cracks. What's happening inside you during this phase matters more than what's happening outside. You begin to feel a strange calm, almost boredom, where anxiety used to be. Situations that once consumed your thoughts now pass through you without sticking. You are no longer rehearsing conversations or imagining how to explain yourself better. Your mental energy returns to you. And with that return comes clarity. Clarity changes how you see people. You stop romanticizing intentions. You stop assuming misunderstanding where manipulation exists. You stop overgiving to prove your value. You start observing behavior as data, not as a personal judgment. This shift alone rewires your posture in the world. Your voice steadies, your presence sharpens. You become harder to rush, harder to pressure, harder to guilt. And here is the quiet truth most people never hear. Toxic people don't lose when you fight them. They lose when you outgrow the emotional environment they depend on. When you no longer meet them where they live psychologically, they cannot follow you without changing themselves. Most won't. So they linger behind, confused, frustrated, slowly realizing that the game they were playing no longer includes you. And by the time they sense that loss fully, you're already operating on a level where their tactics no longer register at all. At some point, they will think they are winning, and that belief is what finally exposes them. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop meeting them emotionally, they interpret your calm as weakness, your distance as retreat, your silence as surrender. This is where patience becomes lethal. You let them believe the story they want to believe, because arrogance makes people careless. And careless people reveal everything without being asked. They begin to overstep. They speak more freely. They push boundaries they once tested carefully. They assume you're no longer paying attention, but you are watching with clarity, not emotion. You notice the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the subtle confessions hidden inside their confidence. When someone believes they have control, they stop hiding their intent. And intent, once visible, is power handed back to you. What makes this phase dangerous for them is that you are no longer invested in correcting the narrative. You don't interrupt, you don't defend, you don't rush to fix misunderstandings. You allow their words to stand on their own. Time does what confrontation never could. People start noticing patterns without you pointing them out. Situations expose themselves naturally. And when the truth emerges without your involvement, it carries more weight. Inside you, something solidifies. The urge to respond fades completely. You no longer feel the need to be fair to those who were never fair to you. You become selective with your energy, deliberate with your attention. You stop mistaking emotional intensity for importance. Calm becomes your default. And calm changes how others treat you, even those who are not toxic. They sense that you are not easily moved. This is where emotional discipline turns into authority. You don't demand respect. You attract it by being unshakable. Toxic people feel this shift before they understand it. They sense that their influence is slipping, that their presence no longer carries weight. Some will try one last provocation, hoping to resurrect the old dynamic. Others will retreat quietly, looking for easier targets. And this is the moment you must not sabotage yourself with victory speeches or explanations. You don't announce your growth. You don't confront them with what you've learned. You let the silence speak, because the most effective win is the one they can't argue with. When they realize they can no longer affect you, the game ends without closure, without drama, without a final scene. And that unfinished ending stays with them far longer than any confrontation ever could. Eventually, you reach a point where access becomes the real currency, and this is where the balance fully tilts in your favor. You don't announce boundaries, because announced boundaries invite negotiation. You simply reduce availability. You take longer to respond. You stop volunteering personal details. You no longer make yourself emotionally reachable on demand. From the outside, it looks subtle, almost unnoticeable. From the inside, it is decisive. You are no longer open terrain. Toxic people struggle most with this phase because it gives them nothing to fight against. There is no argument to twist, no accusation to deny, no dramatic exit to criticize. You are still there, but not reachable in the way they relied on. This creates a specific kind of frustration, because control without access is impossible. They may try charm, they may try guilt. They may suddenly become kind, reflective, even apologetic. These shifts are not growth, they are tactics. And because you are no longer emotionally hungry, you can see them clearly. What changes inside you now is your sense of self-positioning. You stop viewing relationships as obligations and start viewing them as exchanges. Not transactional in a cold sense, but energetic. You notice who respects your pace and who resents it. You notice who adjusts when you pull back and who escalates. These observations tell you everything you need to know without a single conversation. People reveal their intentions most honestly when they don't get what they want. This is also where guilt tries to creep back in, because you were conditioned to believe that accessibility equals goodness. But accessibility without discernment is self-betrayal. You are not responsible for managing other people's emotions. You are responsible for protecting your clarity. Once you accept that, guilt loses its grip. You realize that peace is not something you ask permission for. It is something you choose. As access decreases, your presence changes. When you do speak, your words land heavier because they are rare. When you do engage, it feels intentional, not reactive. People start adjusting their behavior around you without you asking. Conversations become cleaner, drama thins out, and the ones who only knew how to relate to you through tension begin to fade, not because you push them away, but because they no longer recognize the terrain. Toxic people often interpret this as coldness, but coldness is emotional absence. What you're developing is composure. There is warmth where it's earned and distance where it's required. That balance is unsettling to people who depend on extremes. They prefer either closeness they can exploit or conflict they can dominate. Neutrality gives them neither. At this stage, you're no longer focused on them at all. Your attention has shifted inward and forward. You invest energy into things that compound instead of drain. Your thoughts are quieter, your reactions slower. You pause before responding, not because you're afraid, but because you're selective. That pause alone communicates strength. It signals that you are not easily rushed, pressured, or pulled off center. And this is the quiet conclusion toxic people never expect. They assume the end of the game will be loud, emotional, dramatic. They wait for a final confrontation that never comes. Instead, they slowly realize that their influence has expired. Not revoked, not argued away, simply outdated. You moved on internally long before anything changed externally. By the time they fully understand what happened, you're already operating from a different posture entirely. Not defensive, not angry, just aligned. And alignment is what makes you untouchable, because when your actions, boundaries, and inner state move together, no one can manipulate one without confronting all three. That is the point where the game doesn't just end, it becomes irrelevant. When they begin to realize that something has changed, it doesn't arrive as clarity. It arrives as discomfort. They feel it in the way conversations no longer land, in the way their comments don't create the reactions they're used to, in the way you seem present but unreachable at the same time. This is the phase where toxic people become restless, because control slipping away is more frightening to them than open conflict. Conflict at least confirms relevance. Indifference does not. Their next move is almost predictable. They test one last time. Sometimes it comes as sudden friendliness, an attempt to recreate the old closeness. Sometimes it comes as subtle criticism, hoping to trigger self-doubt. Other times it appears as guilt, reminding you of favors, history, or emotional obligations. None of these tactics are random. They are checks designed to see whether the old access still exists. And if it doesn't, frustration replaces confidence. What's important here is that you don't misinterpret this shift as progress or reconciliation. Temporary softness is not growth, it's adjustment. You stay steady, neither cold nor eager, neither confrontational nor submissive. Your consistency becomes the message. You are no longer available for emotional bargaining. That alone forces them to face a reality they avoid. Their influence was never intrinsic. It depended on your participation. As their tactics fail, their internal state begins to unravel. The calm they once used as a weapon disappears. Their behavior becomes inconsistent, their tone sharper, their timing worse. This isn't because you're doing something to them. It's because you've stopped doing something for them. Without emotional fuel, their composure collapses under its own weight. Meanwhile, your inner experience is radically different. You feel grounded, clear, less alert for danger, less prepared to defend. Situations that once demanded analysis now pass without friction. You're no longer measuring every interaction for hidden meaning. You trust your perception, and that trust creates stability. This is the quiet separation point. Not dramatic, not declared, just real. They remain who they are, and you move forward as who you've become. There is no announcement, no closure conversation, no final explanation. And that lack of closure is what makes the separation permanent, because toxic people thrive on unfinished emotional loops. When you no longer provide one, the cycle breaks, cleanly, finally, and without noise. By now, the power dynamic has fully inverted, even if no one ever names it. You are no longer managing their emotions, anticipating their reactions, or adjusting yourself to keep the peace. You exist on your own terms, and that autonomy changes how everything around you responds. People who are grounded recognize it. People who are insecure feel threatened by it. That contrast alone filters your environment. Toxic people sense this shift and often retreat quietly, not because they've learned a lesson, but because influence no longer flows their way. There is nothing to extract, no reaction to provoke, no confusion to exploit. You've become emotionally self-contained, and self-contained individuals are immune to manipulation. They cannot be rushed, guilted, or pulled into unnecessary battles. What matters now is maintaining this posture without arrogance. Power that announces itself invites challenge. Power that simply exists reshapes the room. You don't correct people who misunderstand you. You don't chase respect. You let behavior reveal alignment. Silence, when chosen, becomes clarity. Distance, when intentional, becomes protection. This is not detachment from life. It is precision within it. You engage where there is mutual respect and withdraw where there is friction disguised as familiarity. You no longer confuse intensity with connection. Calm becomes your standard, and that calm is not passive. It is earned. From this place, toxic people become irrelevant rather than defeated, and irrelevance is the only outcome they cannot recover from. Because without emotional access, without narrative control, without influence, there is nothing left to manipulate. The game doesn't end in victory or loss. It ends in disinterest, and disinterest is the final form of freedom. And this is where it ends, not with noise, not with revenge, not with a final confrontation, but with mastery. You don't defeat toxic people by overpowering them. You defeat them by becoming unreachable to their influence. Your calm replaces your anger. Your clarity replaces your explanations. Your silence replaces your need to be understood. You move forward, lighter, sharper, unbothered, and they are left behind, still playing a game you no longer recognize. If this way of thinking sharpened your mind, support Mindletics by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications. Stay disciplined, stay aware, and stay untouchable.